Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good day everyone. So today I'm going to explain to you on how to write a lab report. So we will be focusing the lab report for PHY110 Mechanics 1. So what exactly is a lab report? Why the lab report is important? And what are the important contents of a lab report? So these are the contents for today's slide. Now first you need to know what exactly is a lab report. So a lab report is actually a report that records what happened before, during or after the experiment was conducted. So inside the lab report, it must include reasons for you to conduct the experiment, how the experiment was being conducted, what are the apparatus, the supplies that is used, and how the results goes, and how does the results relate with theory and etc. So basically, science is not just doing something just to get a result, but it is of how well it's showing how well you understand that result from the experiment and how does it relate to the theories. That's how science goes. That's why lab report is very important in science, because from the lab report it able to collect and organize the data that is obtained from experiments of many scientists, and also the lab report enable us to share the information that we obtain from the experiment with other scientists. And from the lab report itself, it reflects the quality of the experiment that we have conducted. So the important contents of a lab report are: it must include cover page, objective, methodology, results and data, analysis, discussion, conclusion, and lastly, references. Now first, I'm going to explain on the cover page. So inside the cover page, it must contain a title of experiment, the author's details, and also the date of submission. So here I have the example of a cover page of a lab report for PHY110. So you must complete all the details on the cover page. Next, let's talk about the objective. So every experiment must have objective. So you have to list down what are or what is the objective for that corresponding experiment. Here is an example of objective for experiment of static friction. Now let's proceed with the methodology. So after you have stated the objective, you have to write the list of apparatus that is used in the experiment, and then draw the schematic diagram of the experimental setup and make sure the diagram is clearly drawn and labeled, and the image must be understandable. All apparatus drawn should be labeled, and then you have to state step-by-step procedure of how the experiment being conducted. So this is an example of how the methodology can be written. So next, number 4 is the results and data. So all data that should be recorded from the experiment, and the data that is being recorded and put into the lab report must be accurate, and it also must be written in a clear format, and all quantities mentioned inside the lab report must include with the correct units. So how can we write the data? So the data can be written either by listing them or by putting all the data in table. So how to list data? For example, maybe you have a quantity, so you just state the measured value, and then don't forget the uncertainty along with the unit of that quantity. So also, if you have a list of data for one certain quantity, so you can write them in table. That will be much more simpler and it looks more clean and understandable. So this is how a table of data should looks like. So here I'm going to explain on detail. So the table should include, don't forget to put caption on the table. There is a title for the table. Okay, so each table must have number, because in your report you might gonna have more than one table. So in your discussion or in your methodology, so you will mention that table, so you need to give number for the table. So for example here, table 1.1. So a title of the table is actually a short introduction on the variables in the table. Okay, so for example here, time taken T. So T here, we already know T is the time taken by metabol to reach Q point with respect of mass M. So M written in the table is mass. So from the title, readers can understand the symbol that you use inside the table. That's one of the important thing of the title. Okay, so inside the table, so you have the variable symbol M, T for example, and don't forget you should have inside the bracket, you should write the unit for the data that you put inside. For example here, mass 0.1, here is 0.1 gram. So unit is very important. Okay, so here we have the uncertainty. So the uncertainty depends on the instrument that you use. Okay, so the number of decimals of the data written here should obey with the uncertainty written in the title. So here I have example of how example of data that is written in list, example of data that is written in table, other examples. Okay, now number 5, analysis. So how the analysis looks like. So there are two types of analysis. Some experiment can have both analysis, graph and calculation, and some experiment might only involve calculation. So I'm going to show you how we draw graph for a certain data. So a graph should contain title of graph, the axis label, the data points, and lines. Now let's look more detail on the graph. So this is an example graph of a, let's say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 data points. So these data points is according to the data recorded in the table. Okay, so we must have y-axis and x-axis. So the scale must be equal. So each axis must be labeled. So this label, if you use a symbol label, like for example here we have F spring, and don't forget to write down the unit for these quantities. Okay, so the unit. So F spring here, you should mention in the title what is that symbol F spring. For example here we have the title as graph of spring force. So means that F spring is the spring force. Okay, against extension of spring delta S. So delta S written here is extension of spring. So title of graph should explain the variables used in the graph. Okay, now let's proceed with the lines. So when you have plotted the data, so usually the data would be like not very precise. Okay, but that's no problem. So you have to estimate which one is the best line. So one of the method for us to help us to estimate the baseline by finding the central point, because the central point gives you the center point of your data. So this is how you calculate the central point. Okay, the total of data for x-axis the total of data divided by the number of data for the x-axis. So this is the coordinate x, and therefore the coordinates y of the central point is the total of data y divided by the number of y data. Okay, so here for example, here we have 0.146, 0.442, so that is the coordinate. So follow the coordinates, so that point center is here. Okay, so referring to these points, you draw the baseline. So sometimes depending on the formula of the theory, sometimes your line should start from 0. Sometimes it may not start from 0. So it depends on the relation between the y and x. Okay, so for example, here we have it should start from 0. So we have a baseline here, intersect the central point. Okay, so that is baseline. And then for us to calculate the uncertainty for a line, so you need to draw another 2 lines. So the 2 lines actually the 2 best estimated lines other than the baseline. Okay, so the minimum line, so you actually have another 2 chance to draw lines. Okay, so we have the minimum line and also the maximum line. Now, that's all about graph. Let's proceed with calculations. So here I have example of the calculation. Okay, so you have to include all the calculation in detail. So maybe you want to achieve the objective, you need to calculate some values. So all the calculations should be written in detail. Okay, next. Okay, one of the most important part in laboratory report of science is discussion. So discussion is you explain the analyzed results and then you relate the analysis with theory of the corresponding topic, and then you give examples that can relate the experiment with other situation or maybe environment. There will be a bonus mark for that if you include that in discussion. Next, you should able to describe how well the results that you obtain agree with the theory. Okay, you can talk about the percentage error between the standard value and your experimental value. That is one way for you to describe the results with the theory. And then you can give sources of errors that may cause the difference of results that is obtained with the standard value. So maybe there's some difference with the standard value compared with your experimental data. So you should state what are the sources of errors that might occur during your experiment that has caused that difference to have. Okay, and then give suggestions for you to improve the experiment. So these are the suggestions for content that you can discuss in your lab report. And remember, it would be better for the discussion to be written in essay form. And also avoid plagiarism, must be written in your own words. Okay, lastly is the conclusion. So you have to state conclusion according to the objective of the experiment. So let's say earlier you have written down 3 objectives for the experiment. Therefore, you should have at least 3 conclusions that answering the 3 objectives. Okay, so conclusion is actually answering your objective. And in that conclusion, you should state the results along with the uncertainties and the error values for that results. So this is an example rubric for a laboratory report. So how evaluator evaluate your report. So these are the important things that you should consider in your report. Okay, that's all from me. I hope now you have the picture of how a laboratory report should look like. So I hope that you will be ready by the time that you have by the time that after you have done your experiment, then you have to write your report, and I wish you all good luck. That's all from me. Assalamualaikum and thank you for listening. Goodbye.